I'm your host, Henna Zuberi, and welcome back to another season of Justice for All Now. Join us on our first episode as we discuss Islamophobia in the Francophone world, that's France and Quebec, Canada. Our guests today are Monia de Cartena. Monia is a human rights activist, a legal expert, and a member of Perspectives Musliman. With us also is Monia Mazigh. She's an academic, an award-winning Canadian author and human rights activist. She writes in French and English and has authored so far a memoir and 3 novels celebrated by the critique. Her latest novel, Farida, won the Ottawa Book Award for French fiction. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, you too. I'm really happy to be able to discuss with you tonight.
So a growing number of mosques have been closed by authorities using an array of powers that rights activists, international organizations, including the United Nations, and members of the Muslim community say give authorities carte blanche to close down places of worship without proper scrutiny and without procedures. In October 2021, the French President Emmanuel Macron laid out the vision behind a new, deeply controversial bill. The government claimed a minority of France's estimated 6 million Muslims were at risk of forming a counter-society. And the bill was designed to tackle the dangers of this quote-unquote Islamist separatism. In 2004, France banned Muslim women from wearing veils in school. In 2010, France passed legislation that banned the wearing of clothing in public that covered the face, mainly to target women who wore burqa. President Emmanuel Macron has stated that the hijab is not in accordance with French ideals. Islamophobia in France takes many forms, both explicit and implicit, and often appears to be sanctioned by the governing bodies themselves. These cultural biases reveal how the Muslim population acts as a scapegoat for problematic status of immigrants in France more generally. So to discuss this in much more detail as they live these realities, I'd like to have our esteemed guests, introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, how they got involved in the work that they do, and then I'll have some more specific questions about their regions that they live in. So Monia, can you tell us more about how you got involved in activism and a little bit about yourself?
Yes. As you said it, I'm living in France, and I'm a legal expert and a member of Perspectives Musliman, or Muslim Perspective. Perspective Musliman is a space of politicization. It's a group which was created in the wake of the Coordination Against Separatism law, which tried to carry out actions of awareness, protest, etc. Since the Islamophobic policy has not stopped following the vote of the separatism law, and in contrary, state Islamophobia in France is even more violent and hostile toward Muslims. We decided to continue our actions and our resistance to systemic Islamophobia. So the aim of Perspective Musliman is to be operational on the ground, and by organizing different events, public meetings, demonstrations, trainings, we act on several levels. So we make actions on the ground, as it's important that there is a visibility of the opposition to the policy that is currently being carried out by the state Islamophobia, by the French state. We also organize medium and long-term actions, which are awareness-raising actions. We organize trainings and conferences because we consider that it's crucial to make people aware that everything depends on them. Our goal when organizing trainings and conferences is for Muslim community in France to gain autonomy in order for Muslims to be independent and organized. And the other kind of action that we are doing are more related to advocacy and information. We inform the public about French Islamophobia, at the national and international level to raise awareness on the subject. So we also analyze Islamophobic laws. We popularize these laws in order for Muslims to understand the impact of these laws on the life of Muslims. It's also, we think, important to keep record of all the attacks against the rights and freedoms of Muslim citizens. So this is how I'm acting, and I'm a militant, and I'm defending the rights of Muslims in France against state Islamophobia.
Well, thank you for your work, and thank you for being here. Dr. Monia, Assalamu alaikum. You've been a part of many Justice for All programs as well, and I'm very familiar with your work, but I'd love for you to share a little bit of background, how you got involved in advocacy and activism for our audience.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much for inviting me to the show. I'm happy to hear also Maria as well, and get her feedback from what's going on in France. I live in Ottawa, Canada. I am originally from Tunisia, and I actually grew up in a country where there was a ban on hijab, but that was not recently. That was in the 1980s and then 1990s. So I came to Canada to basically to be able to be free and choose whatever I wanted to, to practice and to believe in, and to wear whatever I felt comfortable. Unfortunately, years later, it's been like I have been reached again by this sort of state Islamophobia. In Canada as well, particularly in Quebec, French-speaking province. My activism started around 2002, and it was somehow personal because my husband was arrested and by the American authorities into the so-called law on terror, and he was deported to Syria at that time. And since then, it started with a personal, I guess, advocacy, but then I never stopped and went back to my normal life. And my advocacy continued protesting against the so-called war on terror, the policies that were introduced and implemented in Canada. So I became not only really like advocating on my behalf of my family, but also on many other Canadian arrested abroad or detained in Canada. As a Muslim woman as well, I lived in Quebec and I lived in Montreal for the first 7 years since I arrived to Canada. And I followed the news, and I followed how the society was actually putting always Muslim women as a scapegoat, and whether it is during the election or during, some sort of public debate. So even though I don't live in Quebec anymore, I still follow the situation over there because I have friends and I am a French-speaking person. Mm-hmm. So I really interested in what's going on, and I chose to write. So I do a lot of writing in English and in French, and some of my books are fiction, but some of my writing are essays about those topics of whether it is terrorism, national security, and women's rights as well, and particularly how Muslim women are most of the time used as scapegoat into the debate of politicians.
Mm. Well, thank you for that. Now let's just, I'm going to go back to Maria. And some French people hold a belief that Islam is opposed to secularism and modernity. And this fear is sometimes considered to originate in the country's experience with terrorism and the belief that Muslims are unable to integrate with French culture. How do you respond to this claim?
Well, I will start by saying that the question is taken backwards. I will explain why I'm saying this. There is not only one cause which generates Islamophobia. It's assumed, according to the French definition of the nation, that nation is already constituted. Therefore, there is a vision. So we need to distinguish between what thinkers or academics think and what French people think. So the question we should ask here is, does the Muslims' way of life explain the rejection of Muslims in France? The answer is yes and no. Yes, because Muslims believe in things that we are at odds with the dominant culture. Muslim belief is to fight for justice, to fight for equality, and so on. The values that we have are at odds with liberalism, for instance. So there is something in our way of life that goes against certain neoliberal assumptions, such as individualism, competition, because we believe in solidarity, community, and sharing. So there are both concrete things that Muslims do that cause us to be in contradiction with the general beliefs, and other things that are projected onto us. So the things projected onto us are related to the Islamic clothing at school, for instance, the Islamic clothing in the street, the bikini at swimming pool. So they are making projection by accusing Muslims of wanting to destroy French civilization. And they accuse Muslims of being internal enemies. So both what Muslims are, so what we do and what we believe, which is against dominant order, and the other thing are the delusional things that are projected onto Muslims. So they created a Muslim problem. They raised a Muslim problem. And here I think it's interesting to mention and detail and to provide one of the definition of Islamophobia. There are several approaches of Islamophobia, and one which is focused on Islamophobic acts and another one focused on Muslims. Perspective Musulman adopts a definition centered on Muslims. So Perspective Musulman considers that Islamophobia is a reaction to the ability of Muslims to act, namely to what Muslims are and Muslims undertake. Muslims in France are attacked as a community, and this community is a discriminated group. And as a discriminated group, they need to be able to defend themselves and to have the tools to do it. Muslims should be supposed and supported as a political actor. So we need to give to Muslims in France all the strength and all the tools to defend themselves. So if I have to summarize what I said just now, Islamophobia is a reaction. Islamophobes act in reaction to the presence of Muslims who are assets with the civil society or various associations, who are assets in the business environment at high-level positions in big groups, who are also assets in the academic area or who run their own business. So how French state Islamophobia react to this? The state put some separation, and the state had to hit hard to dismantle Muslim visibility. So the more there is Muslim religious expression or Muslim political expression, the more the state finds itself under threat and thinks that the Islamic penetration progress. Therefore, wearing a qamis, wearing a hijab, wearing a bikini, or wearing a niqab is a problem for Islamophobes because the state requests to Muslims to be neutral.
Mm. We're going to continue this conversation right after this break.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
Welcome back. So in order to continue this conversation, I'm going to go back to you, Maria. You were speaking about Islamophobia as a reaction in France. I wanted to refer to the book by Islamophobia in France by Abdullahi Hajjat and Marwan Mohammed. And in that, they argue that Islamophobia in France is not the result of individual prejudice or supposed Muslim racial or cultural deficiencies, but rather arise out of structures of power that were already in place in France before Muslims started coming into France in numbers. I mean, there've been Muslims in France for historically, but as Muslims started coming in numbers. So can you walk us through that? What sort of power structures were already in place that has augmented this problem?
This comes from the view that France has on the nation. So the French definition of the nation, as I said earlier, is according to them, is the nation is already constituted. So if the nation is already constituted, then the Muslim way of life is a problem. And the Muslim way of life is the nation has to react to the Muslim way of life. I do not want to go into more details about the origin of French Islamophobia and talking about colonization, because I know that I have many arguments and I will use them later to speak about that topic. But yeah, we need to highlight here the definition of Islamophobia that we provided, and that we say that is a reaction to the way of life of the Muslim, to the Muslim faith, and to the view that Muslims have.
So, Monia, what are your thoughts on that definition of Islamophobia?
I think from a Canadian perspective, it is a little bit different than what's going on in France, because, for example, in Quebec, where there is a lot of talk most of the time, and let's not forget about the Islamophobic attack that killed 6 men in the mosque. I think this is coming from some sort of a feeling of difference. So people in Quebec feel that they are different from the rest of Canada because of their language and because of their culture. So they identify a lot more with France, the mother kind of culture, rather than a Protestant, Anglo-Saxon, multiculturalist society. So I think their Islamophobia, and I'm talking here about the Islamophobia of the state, not of people. So it's coming not because Quebec went and colonized North Africa, for instance, like what happened in France, but rather from a feeling of difference, then we have to do things differently, then we have to show that to those immigrants that they have to bind by our rules, and basically what is better than those Muslim that are being demonized all around the world, that not really a lot of people like them internationally, So I think, this is the kind of Islamophobia that we see. But also, if we think about Quebec, the Quebec society, it is also a society that had many issues with religion, and I'm talking here about the Catholic religion. So anything that has to do with religion is looked upon suspiciously, down, not really liked, highly criticized and highly rejected. So because the Catholic religion was somehow put in the background after the Révolution Tranquille, in the 60s. I think Islam came as the perfect sort of, example to continue the suspicion regarding religion and the treatment of, or the way Muslim women choose to wear, everything, all the cultural, aspect of Muslim is once again looked upon through these Catholic lenses of rejection of the religion. So this is just here, maybe it's a little bit abstract for some of your, people follower or who are watching us. But I think it's important to put this into perspective. So there is the Islamophobic sort of acts that some Muslim encounter, whether it is on the workplace, whether it is in the school, in the street. But then there is also the whole Islamophobic sort of essence or really deep side that sometimes are either in the unconsciousness of people or into the some sort of shared belief about Islam in general.
How much has the war on terror played a part in both of these regions in expanding this nation, whether it's as Maria was talking about as a reaction, or as you are talking about how it's playing out in Quebec? I wanted to talk to you about that before we're going to move on to, I wanted to also explore a little bit of history of French occupation and how this plays into what we are seeing today in these countries.
Well, some people think that Islamophobia was born after 9/11 or after the starting of the war on terror. I mean, Islamophobia has really long and deep roots, and I don't think it started only with the war on terror. However, I think the war on terror gave Islamophobia the legal tools and the perfect reason to flourish, to become somehow normalized or somehow accepted, made some sort of the new normal. So I think, nevertheless, I think we should look at the war on terror because, first of all, when the first laws were passed, and that maybe somehow, maybe the French at that time did not think that they were particularly somehow, concerned about what happened in the United States, right? In terms, those things happen in the United States. So the first anti-terrorism law happened in the Patriot Act in the United States. Immediately after, in Canada, we had our own Canadian anti-terrorism legislation, Bill C-36, if I'm not mistaken. And many Canadians at that time also, and including Muslim, they thought not really concerned about these laws because they said, they are going to make us safe. They are going to make us in a better, feel, somehow protected from those terrorists. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Those very invasive, very problematic pieces of legislation started with what appeared as Islamic terrorism or violence coming from Muslim ideology, but then very quickly it affected other aspects like environmental group, like indigenous group, like some other groups who did not necessarily accept the mainstream sort of way of life or way of consumption and all these things. And it seems like, if I may add this here, maybe as a way for my friend Maria in France, I think from my understanding is that what happened, especially with the killing of the teacher in France, I think, and the consequent legislation that happened afterwards, I think, if I may compare that to, it was like some sort of the 9/11 in France as compared. So the government and the French government used, those horrible tragedy to pass on these new legislation that impacted the lives of Muslims. And you have been talking about the mosque, about the charitable organization. So absolutely, the war on terror exacerbated the existing Islamophobia.
Maria, let's talk about the history of French occupation in Muslim countries and how that plays into what we are seeing in France. And then Monia, if you could talk about that in Quebec, especially with your background as a Tunisian.
Yes, the most important thing that we need to underline that happened during French colonization is the fact that Muslims were considered as indigenous. So those who had the least rights were the Muslims. So belonging to the nation was based on whether you are a Muslim or you are not. Since the Crémieux Decree of 1870, only Muslims remained in the category of natives or indigenous. Islam excluded you from full membership to the nation. And there you could not vote, you were not able to be a public or state employee. As a Muslim, you were a subject and not a citizen. So to sum up, you could not be French. And during the colonization, being a Muslim became a tool of resistance. The second point important to highlight here is that it has been a constant demand from Muslims during French colonization to apply the principle of secularism in Algeria. And the authorities have always refused that because they wanted to keep full control on Muslims' faith. French Empire was in charge to appoint imam in Algeria. They confiscated the Habus good, and therefore the good that are belonging to the Muslim institutions. So which means that de facto Muslim institutions found themselves without the ability to meet expenses, for instance. So France had a total control over the Muslim faith. The law of 1905 did not apply in Algeria. This law is the law on secularism, the split between the state and the church. And there we find things that we have today. Muslims are under citizens. We can think that in France, and especially after the separatism law, French Muslims do not have the same rights as other French in the country. So what we find today is what already happened during the French colonization and during the colonization of Algeria in terms of dynamics, resistance, and even demands.
Monia?
Yes, very interesting. as I mentioned from the beginning here, that I was born and raised in Tunisia, another French colony. I mean, the French do not call it a colony, as opposed to what happened in Algeria. They call it like a protectorate, which is a protection. So it says a lot, because as if we were really like we needed that protection from the French to survive, basically, and to continue living. The French presence also, when it ended in 1956, it did not end. I mean, maybe it ended somehow with the military presence, but what happened is that the Bourguiba, who was the first president, was French educated somehow. He was also very secular in a way that he linked the backwardness of people of his country to to basically some sort of to the way that women were not educated, which I think it is fair to say true, but also to the way that to religion in general, or to some sort of practicing of religion. And one of the first symbol that came really under attack was the way women were dressed. So the way women are dressed, like their hijab, or what they called sefseri, or those traditional, were regarded as sign of oppression, and they were constantly later on attacked until in 1980s, where there was some sort of a directive in the public administration banning women who are public servant to or are worker in the public sector to appear wearing hijab. So that we are not talking about here about a non-Muslim society. We are talking about a Muslim society, but with an elite that basically worked as a proxy for a continuation of the colonization of the country. So a very Francophone elite that continued those same policies that Maria spoke about in Algeria, they continued in Tunisia. Well, I think what I also wanted to bring here, the point very important to bring it back to Quebec. It is very interesting to see how Canada in general has colonized. It's a colonizing power. It colonized the First Nation, the Inuit, those people who were the first inhabitant of this land. So those same sort of power dynamic are still, in my opinion, still applied today to immigrants, to people of color, and of course, because Muslim are today the bad people, or everybody agree that they don't want to be associated with Muslim or with Islam. So it became also those same sort of tactics of the colonizer vis-a-vis the one who are weaker or have less power, or who want to to become accepted as fully citizen on this lands. So colonization and its dynamics are still at work, even in Canada, and of course in countries that were previously colonized by French and Britain as well.
Maria, you were talking about that Muslims are not fully French. How do the French deal with converts? Those are ethnically French. They have been there for centuries. Their families are from there, but they accept Islam as their faith. So how are those Muslims treated?
It's something hard for French people to understand the fact that some people, some women or some men choose to become Muslims. So how they deal with the revert are not protected from Islamophobia. So Islamophobia is also hitting Muslims with origins, such as North African origins or African origins, but also hitting reverted Muslims. So because it's a way of life. It's a reaction to a way of life. So,
Well, we're going to take a break right here, and we'll be right back after this break.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
Welcome back. Now, here I wanted to discuss with my guests some of the specific policies that they're seeing in their region that particularly concern them. Maria and Monia, for example, if they say in France, it's almost Kafkaesque, where they talk about, and this is a quote from a UN Special Rapporteur, as she talks about the protection of human rights while countering terrorism of legal procedures used in cases which can include evidence where the source isn't identified. These are the sort of laws that we're seeing in France that are really attacking French Muslim institutions, bank accounts, personal bank accounts of activists. These are some of the things that we've seen as we've been following the rise and the extreme forms of actions that are being taken against the Muslim community. What are some policies that you are seeing, because you're on the ground and you have to live through it every day?
I have one remark before giving you the different policies that concern Muslims in France. I would like to highlight the fact that there are laws and the spirit of the laws. Sometimes there are no laws banning something. However, when mainstream media and politicians say that such and such thing is a problem, we end up legislating or extending the consequences of a law. Even without laws, thousands of Muslim women are prevented from working, prevented from granting the validation of their diploma with an internship. Muslim women are also prevented from practicing a sport, for instance, sometimes. So it's not only policies that ban Muslims to live their life, but if we want to see the different Islamophobic laws that we have in France, I'm going to lead them and that target Muslims. We have the law of 2004 prohibiting Muslim women wearing hijab at school, middle school, and high school. We have also the law of 2010 banning Muslim women to wear the niqab. We have a ministerial circular of 2012 banning Muslim mothers wearing hijab to go with their children to school trips. And since summer 2021, we have the anti-separatism law, which institutionalized Islamophobia. And if I summarize a bit the impact of this law on Muslims today, this law banned homeschooling for Muslims. This law put the religious practice of Muslim under scrutiny. Muslim NGOs and associations are strictly monitored because the government have a greater power now to dissolve them and to close association. Also, the khutbah of the imam are scrutinized due to the Imam Charter, forbidding them to speak about political matter, for instance, in their speech. They cannot speak about the Palestine, for instance, inside the mosque. Or they cannot speak about state Islamophobia. The anti-separatism law also ban Muslim women from wearing hijab and from participating to national and international sport competitions. And also, the anti-separatism law wanted to ban the burkini at swimming pool and private swimming pool and even public. So at private swimming pool, it's not forbidden, but it's banned in public swimming pool. So yeah, this law has a big consequences on the Muslim life.
And as you're talking about these laws, I'm thinking about the French banner, right? They talk about equality, liberty. Where is the equality and liberty for Muslims? If the idea is to save, quote unquote, Muslim women from oppression, as we see this stereotype, this trope of oppressive Muslim men, and the French society wants to save Muslim women. What are they ending up doing to these Muslim women? Like, how are you seeing this particularly insidious gendered Islamophobia revealing itself?
Well, France benefits from non-Muslims abroad from the image of a country of human rights and from the country of liberté, égalité, fraternité. But there is no liberté, égalité, fraternité for Muslims in France. For Muslims, and as I said earlier, they are treated as indigenous in their own country. They are treated as under citizens. They are scrutinized. So there is no equality, no liberty for them, no égalité, no. And regarding the gendered Islamophobia, I prefer to speak about all the attacks against Muslims in France, because the attacks at the moment against Muslims are without precedent. Islamophobia in France is a closure of mosques. Islamophobia in France is closure of association. Islamophobia in France is monitoring of Islamic NGOs and association. Islamophobia in France is deportation of imams, such as the imam of the Mosque of Saint-Chamond, who was expelled in 2021 to Comoros because he quoted a verse of the Quran. Islamophobia in France is a closure of Islamic publishing houses. Islamophobia in France is a closure of Islamic schools. Islamophobia in France is closure of fast food and restaurants owned by Muslims. So this is here, the state Islamophobia and all the attacks against Muslims. So it's more than a gendered Islamophobia. It's a state-organized Islamophobia. It's a real politic of dismantling all visible Muslim religious expression and or political expression.
Monia, are you seeing similar policies in Quebec, in Canada, where Muslim rights are being curbed, Muslim social society, social services, organizations are being monitored, and the various ways gendered Islamophobia is rearing its head in Canada? And I 100% respect Maria's call to that Islamophobia in France is much broader than the concern about whether Muslims women are allowed to wear hijab or niqab, or their husbands are put in jail or fined because their wives are wearing or their daughters are wearing niqab. This is much more than that. It is a dismantling of the fabric of Muslim society in France. What sort of policies are you seeing in Quebec?
Well, first of all, I would like here to make a very important remark yes, the focus today is about French or Francophone sort of Islamophobia, but because I lived in Quebec, because also I'm still living in Canada, not living in Quebec, I would love to also emphasize that Canada is the country, I think, among the G7 country where it had most number of people killed because of Islamophobia. So maybe, compared to Maria, we look like the kind and nice and accepting and multiculturalist as compared to France. Nevertheless, we have 6 men who were killed in a mosque in Quebec, with several other injured. We have also a family of 4 in London, Ontario, who were killed because they were Muslim, attacked by a van driven by a young man. We have also someone who was volunteering in a mosque in Toronto, and he was as well assassinated by a right-wing extremist. So unfortunately, in Canada, we have a problem of Islamophobia, and I wanted to make that clear. Definitely, the Islamophobia that we live in Canada or in Quebec can find some common points as in French, but also some different, given the context and given the historical, the geographical context. So yes, as I mentioned, in Quebec, they look more toward France than, toward, I would say, the United States or the rest of Canada in getting inspiration about, the political debate, about the identity debate that was really like in Quebec that existed before even in Canada. So all this make it clear that Islamophobia exists and do unfortunately, very, very well in Canada and in Quebec. If I want to go here to the particular examples of Islamophobia in Quebec and in the rest of Canada as well. The first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is the implementation of Bill 21, which was the banning of hijab, among other religious symbols, in the public servants, among the teachers, the Crown prosecutor, police officers. So, sorry, I'm not sure about the public servant. I think it's mainly for the teacher, for the Crown prosecutor, and for the police. It was at some point, but I don't think it went through that bill in particular. So that's, for me, it's really the tip of the iceberg of all the Islamophobia happening, and more particularly the gender Islamophobia. Nevertheless, if we want to open up a little bit and move on beyond that tip of the iceberg, not because it's not important, but I think we need to look really deeper, and we really look also wider. So we have in Canada a charitable organization, Muslim charities who were targeted by the state, so by the Canada Revenue Agency, because they had more scrutiny than any other charitable organization. So there is a study that indicates that the numbers of Muslim charities had been scrutinized and, of course, stripped of their charitable status. If we also even go even deeper, we find that these same organizations have been actually their bank account. So financially speaking, their banks do not want to deal with them anymore. So there is some sort of things that we don't want to talk about, but it's still there and it exists. The anti-terrorism legislation is the perfect example of how, even before France, here in Canada, we implemented and we institutionalized, Islamophobia. The anti-terrorism legislation only was used up to today against Muslim citizens. There is no other case where an individual was arrested and was charged and convicted. Even Alexander Bissonnette, who committed the killing of 6 Muslim men, was not charged under the terrorism legislation. So all this to tell you, yes, we do have an institutional Islamophobia. Unfortunately, women represent the tip of gender Islamophobia, represent the tip of the iceberg, and Quebec seemed to be, the front runner, but that do not give any excuse to the rest of Canada as well.
So I'm going to just make a point here. Yes, between France and Canada, perhaps there have been more Muslims killed because of Islamophobia, but just because of our work on genocide, I can state that perhaps China and Burma and Central African Republic have taken that crown of killing Muslims because of Islamophobia and incarcerating them and essentially disintegrating their societies. So just wanted to make that one point. But coming back to Francophone-based Islamophobia, both of you have been doing this work, are on the ground, you're with the community. What can be done? We can discuss this, we've identified it, we see the hypocrisy in these nations, where the world, where refugees around the world come to these countries hoping for a better life, while their own countries have been destroyed by these same colonizers or the same world powers who bomb and assist oppressors in their countries. And people who are coming to find freedom are met with these institutionalized Islamophobic policies. What can be done? What can people in France do? What can people in Quebec do, in Canada do? What can we do here in the United States, as well as around the world? We sometimes see the boycott, the French perfumes. It lasts a couple of days, and then, we're back at buying materials from France. What is sustainable? And what would you like the world to do? Anybody watching this program or involved in human rights work?
We need to create space of politicization, more and more space of politicization, and we need to inform people at national and international level about Islamophobia in France or in Canada or in India or everywhere in the world. And we need to be always under the mobilization to counter systemic Islamophobia everywhere. When one mosque is closed, we need to open 10 more. When an NGO or an association is closed, we need to open 10 or 1,000 more. So this is how we need to respond to Islamophobia. They need to see our resistance. They need to see that we are not going to live and to not stand against this Islamophobia. They need to know that Muslims everywhere are supporting Muslims in France, or supporting Muslims in Canada, or supporting Muslims in India, or supporting Muslims in all the countries where Islamophobia is attacking Muslims and freedoms and the rights of Muslims.
Monia?
I always think that there are 3 levels. We have to be involved politically, we have to be involved in the media, and we have also to resist by fighting these laws. So these laws are written by men and women, so they are not really written in stone. We have to resist them. We have to fight them. We have rules of law, and Muslims should really be there to ask for their rights. Even if those rights are not given to them, they can still ask for them and continue asking for them until they will be given to them. And of course, politically speaking, be involved, and in the media, like what we are doing today. I think those are very important level to be remembered, and we should not stop talking about what's going on and resisting and hoping for better days and better years.
So from what I hear from you, and this is the sort of work that sparks my soul, is an ummah-focused approach, where we don't just leave our brothers and sisters and their struggles at bay because they're in another nation state, that we identify and find the commonalities between the oppression and use the tools that have been given to us, whether it's at the United Nations, whether it is within our own country's infrastructure, to fight this oppression, and use tools like this channel, as you just mentioned, Monia, and we're broadcasting right now as we broadcast this show into homes in rural Canada, in Mexico, in the United States, and globally on the internet, where people can hear voices and hear your voices and realize that there are people who will continue to resist this, that they cannot win unless we stop resisting. So this is something absolutely powerful. The sisterhood is powerful. The Muslim our brothers and sisters joining together and not losing hope is powerful. So Jazakallah khair for both of your time and for being here, and just continuing using your pen and your voices for those who need to see justice, to live in a free world that God has created for all of us to live in. So as we wrap up the show, if there are any last anything else that you would like to share before we sign off, we'd love to hear from you. So about a minute each, perhaps, inshallah.
So thank you very much, sister, for having me and having us. And it was really interesting to have this debate today with sister Mona and you. Thank you. Jazakallah khairan.
Yes, exactly. I thank you for having us. I think I would love to remind actually people who are following you and watching you that it is important to be involved and not say, oh, I'm okay. I live here in Canada. I have food. I have a car. I have a job. So I think this feeling of solidarity is key. Maybe if you are actually doing very well, maybe we need you. Maybe this is where we really need you. We need your support, whether it is financial for organizations who struggle to fight for the rights of other Muslims, whether it is in Canada, in France, all over the world, or, to educate yourself about these issues. I think we need that feeling of compassion, for empathy. Today it's, women who are banned to wear hijab. Who knows what happened tomorrow? And this is why we have to be vigilant, and we have to remain educated and really in solidarity with what's going on around us.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair for all of you for joining us on Muslim Network TV. This is Justice for All Now.